Welcome home, brave heroes. I'm Ash. This is HeroQuest, and it's time for an impromptu bit of podcast content for you as I kind of muse on our latest and greatest entry into the series of HeroQuest expansions, the series of campaigns of adventure ripe for the taking. I'm talking about Jungles of Delthrak. I want to talk about the bold steps that Avalon Hill takes in order to supply us ravaging, crazy, homebrew nut jobs, us who have the passionate voices of nerd rage, us who have helped this game not just survive, but thrive for the last, from 94 until 2021, while the property was left dormant or changing hands in the hands of companies like Chaosium that didn't really know what to do with it, other than to use its name to try to attract people to their Gloranthan world. I am a big fan of Avalon Hill. I've said this many, many times. And before I get too deep into what I want to talk about today, this video is not sponsored by anybody, but it is best enjoyed while you are commuting on the way to work, doing some airbrushing, some kit bashing, perhaps sorting through your What are you guys playing these days for cards? What are you doing? I don't want to use the Magic the Gathering reference anymore. We're done building our Magic the Gathering decks now. We've already sorted through all of them. It's either sort through them again, build a new deck, like a Goblin deck, or man, I didn't know there were so many freaking decks. I just looked at a list of different themed decks you can do, and there's like 100. There are so many different themed decks you can do. Tangent, and let me know what you're doing. Let me know how you're enjoying the current Broadcast, but this is the Broadcast, the podcast long-form series best enjoyed while doing whatever, because there's no video attached to it. It's just a podcast. No guest today. I do want to shout out once again Captain Rubbish, Ribby, Geek Gone Giddy for their wonderful contributions to the channel, for giving me information and pictures and video and links just as soon as they possibly could, and providing exclusive material and just helping me be on board with stuff, because I'm not out there. I'm not as close to the edge of these discoveries as I want to be. Sometimes I can make it out there pretty early, and then my goal is to help get the correct information out to as many people as possible in the shortest amount of time possible, and also make sure that nothing gets blown out of proportion. My hype for Avalon Hill and everything is real, but that's a disclaimer. That's very much you may disagree with this, but here's what I think kind of point. Last episode, I talked about classes and races and a little bit on gatekeeping, and this is not necessarily a part 2 to that episode, but I'll have a few more things to add on to that. Since seeing Jungles of Delthrak and the reaction around it, a lot of people really enjoy what they're seeing from Avalon Hill right now. They really enjoy seeing the Jungles of Delthrak. I did see a comment, and I think I pointed this out in the last episode, if not in the reveal video, that there's just, HeroQuest isn't about fighting animals, it's about fighting monsters. So that they didn't want to see a bunch of animals, like I guess the raptors and the giant ape. And that, and maybe even the spiders. I think there's a place in fantasy for giant spiders for sure. So hopefully that's not included in that. But I totally get it. I'm happy that, I guess in the snake, although if you ask me, there's going to be a place in fantasy for giant snakes thanks to Conan for all of eternity. I'm actually really glad of the animal to monster sort of ratio or inclusion that's with Jungles of Delthrak. It's not a bad ratio at all. The animals are not necessarily like found in nature. I don't think PETA is going to disapprove of our combating the giant blight crawlers. And it's fun to have raptors. I know that there's some folks that have criticisms that, they don't want dinosaurs in their HeroQuest. I get that. That's fine. That's another thing to me that makes sense if you use them in a certain way. Like if you're in a totally dinosaur world, that's a genre. That's a subgenre of fantasy right there to me. That means that you should probably have these dinosaurs more in regular use. If they're roaming the earth, then you've got raptors, which we've got now in HeroQuest. We've got raptors, and they're lovely. They're beautiful creatures. Love them. But that means that doesn't have to mean anything else. That does not have to infer anything else. We've just got raptors. They're monsters. They're out there in the jungles of Delthrak. Who knows where else they're at? Who knows if there are biome variants? We haven't seen any biome variants of the war bears. They seem to only be polar. They love to hang out way up north in the frozen wastes. They're up there with the yetis, which are not nearly as elusive as one might think. We've got a monster here in Missouri called the Momo. The Missouri Monster. It's such an original, fantastic name. It's so great. Love it. Yay. It's just a variant on Sasquatch or Bigfoot, really, because we couldn't even come up with our own monster. And maybe it has its own lore and legend, and as a Missourian, I'm sure I've heard it, but I just don't care. But no, in HeroQuest, the Yetis aren't just stories. They're not just sightings that you don't believe when somebody tells you about them. They are in the game. They're there to hug you, and they suck. They are terrible to run into. You need to have a party of heroes, and you need to take it down as soon as you can. And it's in more than one quest. Yay! Point is, we don't see these guys. We don't see variants of the gremlins out and about. We don't see variants of the other ones. They're stuck in that biome. And yes, yeah, I know. Trust me. I've heard it for years now. It's a homebrew. You could do what you want. I know. God, it never gets old hearing that. But no, rules as written, raw, lore, whatever's currently there, whatever we have to go on. These guys don't venture outside their territories, but we know some monsters do now. We know that there are elves in the Elven Kingdom. Wow, that was a real bright observation, Ash. Good job. We know that not only are there elves in service to Sinestra unwillingly in Mage of the Mirror, we know that there are elves in service to the Dread Forces in Rise of the Dreadmoon, and they are the same sculpt. Therefore, they are the exact same race and class of elves. We know that monsters who finally learned how to pick up a bow or a great bow or lob a Molotov cocktail or whatever the fantasy version of that is, and a boomerang, not only are hanging around along the World's Edge Mountains with the ogres, they are also in the jungles of Delthrak. These are significant findings. We know that not only are dread cultists who are learned in the ways of dread magic and who have some sort of connection to the specters and wraiths commonly found in Elethorn, a place that I never want to go, also have cousins who are green, who wear green robes and who live in the jungles. What does this mean for the lore? I'm not talking about the connected lore here quite directly. I'm just saying we have now examples of monsters taken out of their homes and reused in other settings, and that's really cool to see. I like that a lot. Some people I can see might take issue with the reused cultists. I think it's pretty cool. I like that they're a different color. It's like a different tier to me. They could reasonably have had different stats. They got different abilities. I like it. No reason not to reuse a sculpt every now and then and maybe give it a little bit of a color variation. We didn't have a lot of elves in the original Mage of the Mirror. In the updated Mage of the Mirror, we've got extra elves. So we've got gender variants. And in Rise of the Dreadmoon, we get those exact same sculpts. I think it would have been kind of cool if we'd gotten a different color of those same sculpts, even if everything else were the same, because with different colors, we give homebrewers more tools. We give homebrewers more ability to say, yeah, I'm putting these 3 elves who are archers on the board, but this 4th elf who is an archer is a different color. Therefore, he is the captain of these other elves. And, somebody could just as easily either put one of those base rings on them. And I mean, that would be more than good enough to identify this extra monster, this special enemy, and show players that they have an advanced sort of status. Colored rings go a long, long way. But for those of us who aren't actively going out and buying extra colored rings or reusing them from other games or whatever, it's nice to, by default, out of the box, have these enemies that are different. It's nice because we might not only play HeroQuest. We might have to put everything back in the box. And if it's like multiple expansions and they're not all fitting in the same box, we might have to combine stuff Or we might have to put stuff back into their own separate boxes. We might be a player that has just finished a campaign, and you know what? If you finished this campaign against the Ogre Horde, I'm putting all that stuff back in the box, putting it away. I'm not going to reuse the cards from it. I'm not going to unlock any of the stuff that's in there for use in other expansions. We're going to play that expansion how it was intended to be played, and then we're going to play the new expansion how it's intended to be played, and so on. And when we're ready to play a homebrew game, a custom quest that I made or my campaign or whatever, then I'll break everything out. Sky's the limit. That's fine. And if you've got a hero who has survived the previous expansions and you've got stuff wrote on your character card from that X pack, that's fine. You keep that stuff. You don't need the card representation of it or whatever. All that can go back in the box. It won't hurt anybody. But I say all that to kind of say it's really nice to be able to use the stuff that comes with the game and have your ideas stem from that stuff that's in there. So having the green Blight Weavers versus the Dread Cultists is really cool, because if you decide to use them together, all you got to do is bust out your Rise of the Dreadmoon box, unless you already keep your cultists close by like I do, and bam, you've got two different classes of cult enemy. You could put one green with 4 gray and say that that's the boss. You could put one gray with 4 green and say that that's the boss. You could have 2 of each color. You could have them be in a mirror quest. You could have them both act at the same time on opposite sides of the board. You could have a dread cultist perform a magic spell, a dread spell that is not in the game, that's homebrew, that separates them into like 4, and the player is going to hit different ones. And this point's a little bit more harder to homebrew, but it can be done. If the cultist splits into 2, one's green, one's gray, and the hero can make an attack on one, and then you can roll a die to determine if that was the real cultist. You can kind of do that anyway, just with 2 of the same color cultists, but it's just another idea. It's just another thing you could build off of. More foundation, more ability. And it's nice to have that in the box. And speaking of, we've got our red raptor, which is our animal companion, as well as the green raptors, which are the enemies. It's nice to have that variation too. Point is, the variation is very welcome, in my opinion. I don't mind the different colored enemies because I think it takes what we have now and it multiplies the possibilities rather than just adds to them. Another thing I'm really happy to see, Goblin Warlock. I am a huge fan of goblins. I think goblins in any fantasy are great. They're a great mob character. It's a great low-level baddie. You can just go and slay. You can take out multiple goblins. They can be used for whatever, plot points, summonables, thieves, and as I have famously demonstrated, a single goblin can cause a death blow on a barbarian just by virtue of really, really bad rolls. And so, when we get a lot of monsters in HeroQuest, like goblins, orcs, or skeletons, it is really cool to see a variation of that monster where the sculpt has something different about it. And not only that, but the card for that monster has something different about it as well. Case in point, the archer versions of the monsters that come with against the Ogre Horde. I think the natural progression to encountering enemies in mass is the regular form of that enemy, and then the archer form of that enemy, and then possibly like a brute form of the enemy. And then if you don't have like a brutish enemy of that type in your game, which some people could argue, maybe an orc is just a brute goblin, maybe an abomination is really just a brute orc. You could split hairs about that. That's fine. A brute version of an enemy, and then a sagely spellcaster version of an enemy. So this Goblin Warlock is like tier 3. But it doesn't have any stats of its own. It doesn't have its own card, and it's gray. So really, this is a goblin that has fallen hard into the dread magic. Or at least that's the impression that I get. That's the impression I think some other folks get. The goblin is gray to kind of take after the dread sorcerer of the game system. The goblin is a goblin version of the dread sorcerer. The goblin warlock is basically a short dread sorcerer. And I mean, it's a guarantee that we're going to have named examples of enemies in the book, perhaps just one, perhaps a few, and that this character is going to represent them, and the stats will be called out in the book. I said that in the Delthrak unveiling video. That was my guess there because we have a frame of reference for that already. we have a precedent for that convention, and that's Sinestra from Mage of the Mirror. She was a miniature that came with the game called the Archmage, but in the book, the stats and name that were provided for the Archmage were Sinestra. And she didn't have her own card. Her stats were just called out in the book. So, I mean, that's totally fine. That is on convention. That is something that's been done before. We can probably continue to expect more of that. And it even makes just as much sense because the original Dread Sorcerer also does not have a card or stats. It's a character model that is used to stand in for different named characters in the story with their own called out stats in the quests. And that's something I'm really happy to see, just because I think we need more variations of characters like that don't have their own cards, that don't have their own established self. It's just more a stand-in. It's a unique monster sculpt, and we can use this monster sculpt to play a boss in other official quests as well as homebrew ones now. But I do like it extra because it's a goblin. I'm glad the goblins are getting their time in the spotlight here. Yes, we've got archer goblins and we've got a goblin warlock with Jungles of Delthrak. So it is very much a goblin catering expansion. I called that one too. I forgot to award myself a point for that. Well, I think I did award myself a point for that because the goblin warlock exists to begin with, and I kind of called a goblin magic user. So where does Avalon Hill go from here? What have they done? What's the progression? They've done Rise of the Dreadmoon, and people are attributing that as their first original work. That's their first retail released original work. This Jungles of Delthrak is not quite their second, but I think the production cycle would say that it does come after Rise of the Dreadmoon in terms of development. We have Prophecy of Delor, we have the Spirit Queen's Torment. However, I will say Rise of the Dreadmoon, Jungles of Delthrak, they don't have author attributions. They don't have names attached to them. They're just Avalon Hill Productions. So rather than being quest books by specific named authors like Prophecy of Delor and Spirit Queen's Torment, these are very much representative of the company as a whole. The other ones are kind of like claims to fame for those writers. We've got Crypt of Perpetual Darkness by Joe Manganiello. You know, that's a Joe Manganiello quest pack, we now know, because his name is right on the book. Stephen Baker with Prophecy of Delor and Teo Sabati with Spirit Queen's Torment. Those names should be, rightfully so, associated with those quest packs. Rise of the Dreadmoon has no name. It is just Rise of the Dreadmoon. It is what looks to be a collaborative effort in the writer's room. A lot of different perspectives combined into one, play-tested, balanced, play-tested again, balanced again, presented, represented. Rise of the Dreadmoon is the first official Avalon Hill produced original expansion. And that makes Jungles of Delthrak the second in this original expansion train. I'm liking it. I'm liking it a lot. They're doing some really cool stuff. They are demonstrating that they are, and I know that I've said this before too, looking at all of the ideas, all of the homebrew, all of the solutions that people have come up with for problems that they have perceived to be in different releases due to difficulty and imbalancing, due to lack of playtesting, due to just solutions that are needed for common wants, due to different tables of players having different needs in that group before they get bored and move on to other games. All of these things are presented through these original expansions. And what's more, they are giving us the rules as written and the tools to homebrew our own and have fun with the rules as written if we so desire, because these rules as written that are with these X packs are original enough. They can be used as is without any homebrew whatsoever. And indeed, some of the new characters and enemies that they've come out with have forced people who like to create homebrew and sell it and publish it and sell it for extra coinage to kind of go back and renege and redesign some of the stuff that they've made, because now it's too close. And it presumably, I would think they're afraid that their stuff is now, kind of pointless. It would be just as if somebody came out with their own elf original character. Maybe not elf is the best. Yeah, if somebody came out with their own homebrew elf, but it had the exact same stats and it could use time magic. I don't know. Would you want that? Would you be interested in that? I wouldn't, because we have that in Mage of the Mirror. In the Elf quest pack, we have the elf spells. We have stuff going on with the elf there. We don't need a copy of it. Now, we'd look at a creator like that and say, why didn't you come up with something new? This already exists. Nah, I'm not gatekeeping creation here. I'm just coming up with some logical or perhaps not so logical extremes to talk about. But going back to the direction of this stuff, I'm liking it a lot. We've got our Rise of the Dread Moon, which is, it's almost Gothic adjacent. I mean, there's cultists, there's ghostly enemies, intangible, ethereal. Jungles of Delthrak has enemy keywords, which kind of builds upon those that are found in Rise of the Dread Moon. We just have ethereal, and they're not quite presented the same way, but it is the same concept. It's the same mechanics at play, and it's really cool to see that being expanded upon. It's awesome to see them expanding upon everything. It's bold. It is saying, all right, we like the feedback that we've seen. We're confident that we're going in this direction now. So we have enemies with keywords. They have traits. They have their own attributes. They're kind of like magic cards. There I go, citing magic again for some reason, where I'm going to draw and place this monster. It has trample. All right, well, we've got HeroQuest monsters now that have trample. Maybe not trample by name or by mechanic, or, I mean, that's a terrible example anyway. But there are monsters that have keywords. And could we expect to see keywords like trample or push or flight or flying or made of lava or asleep? Some of these are status effects. Yeah, maybe. But they could be inherent to the enemy when you encounter it and could like be 100% their default behavior. It gives homebrewers a lot more to look at and say, now my idea is more plausible. Now I can come up with this system that perhaps I thought about doing, but was worried it would be too complex. No, now we have rules as written to guide us. We have new rules. We have new expansion mechanics to guide us along our path. And maybe it appeals very much to people who have never homebrewed anything, that aren't in the 20 to 30 plus years of HeroQuest players that are out there. Maybe these keywords appeal to people who were like, I've never even wrote my own quest in anything. Oh man, I'm gonna have so much fun. I'm gonna go ahead and homebrew this abomination to have agile. Oh, he's cool now. He's gonna be going all over the furniture and stuff in the main quests. Oh, I'm gonna have this skeleton be venomous. It's going to be a venomous skeleton, not because he's biting the heroes, although that would be hilarious. It's because his scythe is tipped with poison. And now we've got poison mechanics. We can paralyze the heroes. This is all stuff that can be brought into our normal games, not as necessarily homebrew. Well, I mean, it is homebrew technically, but it's like tier 1 homebrew. It's build your own quest using rules as written homebrew. Which, I mean, I don't know that I would... You know, I've been using the term now pretty much the exact same, the same way the entire time. I call homemade quests that have standard mechanics, standard rules, rules that have precedent, rules that exist in official quests, using monsters that are unaltered from their official counterparts. They're just instances of those classes. And nothing special about it. Homebrew. But that's not quite the same as crafting your own monster with its own stats, or making your own rooms for the board, or making your own systems around which the players have to play. Does any of this matter? Do we want to say like tier 1 homebrew, tier 2 homebrew? Is there another word that I'm missing out on using that actually differentiates these two things and highlights how different they are? They're not that different. They share a lot of space, the Venn diagram, but they do have edge cases where they're different, you know? Maybe somebody invites you to play their game of HeroQuest and they're like, we're going to play an original quest. I'd be like, well, are you introducing maybe a named boss or a few named characters? And is that all you're going to do? And the rest of it's just like quest mechanics and stuff that you come up with? Or are you homebrewing the whole thing? Are we going to be playing HeroQuest on low keyboards? Are we going to be having like gnolls and kobolds join the fray? What kind of HeroQuest are we playing? What kind of HeroQuest are we talking about here? So Jungles of Delthrak fits a jungle theme with a jungle biome. Some folks have said they didn't want to just go from this point A to point B to point C, and they're going all over the world. We're practically teleporting as heroes now. Nobody said that you have to play the campaigns in any particular order, and you don't. I stand firm by that. You play the game system and then play whatever expansion you want mechanically. That is how it is designed to work. There is not anything out there that disagrees with that. There is a suggested order to play the quests in. But even though it's presented by Avalon Hill themselves, it is done so, in my opinion, in my firm opinion, it is only done so to appease people who want to know what the story is, what's the lore order. I don't think there is one. Somebody can come up and say, well, play Rise of the Dreadmoon after Mage of the Moon. I don't think that matters. 100%, it does not matter. You can play these expansions in absolutely any order you want, and read the intro text and read the outro text verbatim, and you're not going to come across anything that debunks or retcons anything that you've already done. You're not. And for that reason, friends, you could play Against the Ogre Horde as your very first expansion, and then you could go right into Jungles of Delthrak, and then you could go from there to Keller's Keep. I mean, I know a lot of you are going to want to play either Keller's Keep or Return of the Witch Lord right out of the game system, because that's tradition. That is classically what we do. Those were the expansions that were the most widely available by a long shot. The other expansions are not even a close second. Everybody who played the game system way back played Keller's Keep and Return of the Witch Lord. And if they didn't back then they did closer to the re-release or in their adulthood when they got curious and went on to eBay. This is just stuff that we did because the X-Packs were available. They were there. They didn't use any unique monster sculpts or anything. They just had extras, and that was great. And the quests that they used, they did have unique tiles, don't get me wrong, and unique map pieces, room tiles, I guess I should say, and also just square single tile tiles, and a couple of cool things like the coffins and the forge and the stairs. But you see how widely used the stairs are? You see how widely used the forge is, and the rolling ball trap, the rolling boulder trap. But despite all of that, play them in absolutely any order you want. And not because it's Zargon's Call, not because you can do whatever you want with Homebrew, but do it because that's how it was designed. It was designed that you play whatever expansion you can get your hands on after the main campaign. And although there is a suggested story order, the stories don't necessarily become muddled or mismatched if you play them in a different order. Although that's there and that's presented from Avalon Hill themselves, it breaks apart. It breaks down fairly quickly. After you finish your game system and your first expansion, and you go into your next expansion, if you've got those heroes and they are just as kitted out as they were when you ended the last one, and you didn't suffer a total party kill, and you didn't lose like 3 out of 4 of your heroes, you're going in there pretty loaded. It's not going to take much time for a party of heroes who are playing the meta and playing intelligently to absolutely steamroll the vast majority of quests after that. Now, Keller's Keep, Return of the Witch Lord in particular, has got a couple of quests that are pretty tricky. You've got one where half the heroes are kidnapped, and the other 2 have to go find them. You have to go rescue them from their cells before you're able to actually use them. That's challenging. That breaks things up quite a bit. There's actually quite a big chance for your heroes to just perish, but it's designed to be used with your champions from the game system. So getting to that point, you should be better kitted out, and you should be in a much better position to get your heroes kitted out should you lose 1 or 2 of them during that quest. Now, I'm going to make allowances here because I'm sure people at this point will realize Frozen Horror is an exception. Frozen Horror and Mage of the Mirror are actually exceptions. They're pretty tough expansions. Those could be easily pushed way back. Frozen Horror in particular, go in there with 4 fully kitted out heroes who have lots of gold and some artifacts, and then you stand a much better chance than you do just going in there after completing the game system. You have almost no chance of completing it otherwise. So that's an exception. So If you play Return of the Witch Lord after you play like 2 or 3 other expansions and you've got all this gold and you've got mercenaries, and I mean, maybe you're not bringing the mercenaries into Keller's Keep or Return of the Witch Lord because they weren't introduced in those X packs and you're an X pack purist and you don't think things should run over, you're still going to go in there and absolutely destroy the Witch Lord. You're going to take him apart bone by bone. You're going to be making Witch Lord bone broth out of this guy, okay? That quest where the monsters spawn from the corners like every single turn, that's not an issue anymore. Your wizard could go in there and cast Fist at this point. I don't care. So where do we go from here? We go in a direction that will be full of subtle subtle surprises, but will still follow the conventions that are set forth. Avalon Hill is really good about breaking their own conventions, but there are some fundamental ones that they will not break, okay? So keep this in mind as we ponder the future of HeroQuest and the future of what Avalon Hill have in store for us. One of the things that they have presented in this current X-Pack is the possibility of having your quest branch off into different adventures, something that has been long overdue. It's something that homebrewers have been doing. So Avalon Hill have tried their hand at it. We'll see if we like their interpretation on it, but it's something that they could easily do again. We've got 16 quests. A campaign should be 10. So I'm thinking we're going to have, I'm speculating, I'm going to predict. All right, we'll see if I'm right. I'm speculating one of 2 possibilities. If there are 16 quests and a campaign is supposed to be 10 of them, we will have we'll either have 6 different quests, six choices in the campaign, 6 A or B choices, and no matter whether you win A or B, when you go on to the next quest, you'll be choosing from A or B again. In this way, the successive quests are accessible from either of the options that you do before. They did say that there were endings, and there's a lot of speculation that the 3 large boss minis with the game, the boss-looking creatures, the snake, the spider, and the ape in shorthand, are like the endgame monsters. The Goblin Warlock might be common to all 3 of these. We might have to go after one of them only. So 16 quests means the first perhaps 6 or 7 quests are going to be your standard quests. You're going to go through those 7 no matter what. The last 3 or whatever leg of the adventure you're going to go on to take down one of those monsters. And I would say it's very possible that we'll be fighting the same monsters. We're probably going to fight at least one of the large blight crawlers, one of the giant apes, and one of the snaky snakes, no matter which direction we go. But I bet you the big boss at the very end of the campaign, along with the Goblin Warlock, will be a boss that has multiple phases. Because remember, this expansion also has multi-phase enemies in it. And you'll only encounter that multi-phase enemy that's based on that particular monster, like say the giant ape and its multiple phases, when you take that particular route. In other quests, you'll just face the giant ape, but in this quest line, you will face the giant ape and its multiple forms. And I'm sure we're going to see that throughout the quest anyway. It's possible it's not even quite that formulaic, that we'll just go on different branches in the middle of this quest chain and maybe select one quest at the very end to go after one particular enemy or one particular treasure. Don't forget, this is all about getting treasure too. There's a lot of treasures to be had in the jungles of Delthrak. That's why we have the treasure icons. So going from here, I think that we'll continue to see all of the contemporary rules introduced with the Frozen Horror and against the Ogre Horde. I think that we're going to continue to see the keywords introduced in Rise of the Dreadmoon with Ethereal, as well as those introduced in Jungles of Delthrak. We'll probably see different keywords rather than keywords that stack on the ones that already exist. We'll probably see continuations of mechanics such as the alchemy deck, although they will again be presented differently to kind of be more encapsulated within that expansion. You will never, ever, ever be expected to have played an expansion before buying any other particular expansion. Officially, you will be expected to have completed the base game and then the current X pack to enjoy the current X pack. That is the only requirement. I don't think Avalon Hill is going to break that convention whatsoever. I don't think Avalon Hill, by that same logic, will expect you to have decks of cards that come with other expansions in order to create a large alchemy deck or anything like that. And we do know that quests are designed starting from up to 18 months in advance. Who knows how long they rattle around in the brains of the different writers before they're really trying to spend or allocate any money or time talking about them or officially designing them. Like, this thing's been going on since 2020, 2019. So we know somebody in that room, in the writer's room at Avalon Hill, said at some point, someday, we're going to do against the Ogre Horde. Okay, it's 2024 now, but I'm certain that that thought came up in their head all that time ago. I'm certain that they said, if this goes really well, we'll be able to do the missing expansions. We'll be able to bring back the Wizards of Morcar, and we'll be able to do the Dwarf expansion and the Wizard expansion. I'm certain somebody in that room thought of that. Somebody in those offices years ago thought of that, and perhaps they are even still with the company today. And so 18 months before they begin official development and then get their timeline out, sure. That means that they've got 1 or 2 expansions in the works now. We know that First Light is coming. We don't know what it is yet. We don't know small box character, adventure pack. We have no idea yet. But we know that that's coming. We don't know what direction they're going to go with their character packs. They have 2 characters in Jungles of Delthrak, and they're both their own thing, their own class. I would love to see more classes, more races introduced. I'd love to see, I don't really know who's missing now. I mean, we've had good halfling representation. We've had good dwarf representation. We've had good human representation. And we've had pretty decent elf representation. We could probably use another magic user, just like the wizard. And so, yeah, the First Light being speculated to be a cleric makes a lot of sense. A cleric or a priest of some kind. A fantasy priest, of course. Commonly called clerics in fantasy. And being that our current magical user lineup is a human wizard, a human druid, halfling druid, and halfling warlock, well, they might break convention with this, and they might make a set of male and female dwarves yet again, or it might be an elf. And we've had the bard before, who was an orc. At this point, I'm kind of wondering if we're going to get another bard. A bard that might come with an adventure pack that has a male and female presenting miniatures, and importantly, not orc, a non-orc. They've shown that they are fine race-changing an established hero. With the druid, they turned the single druid into 2 druid halflings. Perhaps the halflings were just standing on each other's shoulders wearing the skin suit to be the human, so-called human druid that we perceived in the mythic tier after all. No, I think we'll continue to get at least 1 more character expansion. I know that there are people worried about the future of the original expansions and the other expansions that haven't come out yet, and the redo of Wizards of Morcar, Wizards of Zargon. First, I'm not worried about any of that. I think that we're going to continue to see them ramp up production and just continue to crank them out. They're going to have the next one done before we are done playing Jungles of Delthrak. More than likely, we'll see the announcement, while there are still a lot of people who are struggling to get their people together to play through that 3rd leg of the campaign, or however many legs of the campaign there are, so that they can say that they played all 16 quests. Not worried in the slightest, not with them announcing Talisman and showing that they've worked their butts off to give us 5th edition Talisman. Yeah, I realize there's a few of you out there who think it looks like garbage. You're in the wrong place. You're in the wrong place. You can tell me that, but I'm not going to stop being excited about it. I might homebrew some rules depending on some feedback that I've seen, some nice, calm, and collectively shared feedback about the rules and how they've kind of made it a little bit perhaps childlike in its accessibility, Talisman that is, and how it might be better to adapt 2nd edition rules, or 4th edition rather, because 4th edition was just 2nd edition with a dose of revision. That might be a good idea. We'll see. I have to play the game first as is and see what the feel of it is like, because feel matters. And then, of course, we're getting a Talisman Alliance. Alliances, that is a completely new way to play the game, and that hasn't been done before, not officially. It has not been done for the owner of the license to give us a version of Talisman where we can actually play cooperatively. That's different, and that's exciting. So other expansions right now, be damned. I'm very interested in this one. And we'll see if we could possibly take the Alliance rule set and work it backwards with other editions like 3rd edition. Because honestly, if I have a way to play contemporary rules with an older version of the game and use those Games Workshop Citadel minis, I probably will. I mean, any excuse to get 3rd edition to hit the table, in my opinion. I'll play 3rd edition with 4th edition revised rules. I don't care. I just want to see the minis. I just want to see the Citadel miniatures. The Avalon Hill miniatures are great. I'll play definitely with those. But I mean, I can't with the 4th. I can't with the 4th edition minis. I guess it never really occurred to me that I can just toss the minis and play 4th edition with 3rd edition minis or 5th edition minis. Anyway, guys, I've blathered on and on and on about this, and I haven't really said a whole lot, but I do appreciate you guys listening in. I think that the future of Avalon Hill is bright. I think that we're going to continue to get expansions that draw upon the feedback of those who are telling us their experience, sharing with everybody else their experience, what they liked and disliked about the current X-Pack, the previous X-Pack. I'm trying to talk as much as I can about the different things, hoping that somebody out there is still listening. I know Chris Nato, when he was with Avalon Hill, and I hope he's out there thriving right now. I hope he's in a great place where his talents can be fully utilized, where he has autonomy, where he can bring that passion of game development and fun to those around him. And I know that he probably had, very likely, had a lot of people at Avalon Hill who collaborated with him enough and who looked up to him enough to carry that torch while they're still there. But he had told me once that they watch the videos. They're watching the videos. I know they hang out in the forums. I know that they watch, they read, they see. So yeah, we'll continue to use our voices and tell one another about our experiences with the game and what we like and dislike about the systems coming up. I'm a big fan of them giving us the tools to homebrew more stuff. I'm a big fan of them giving us multiplicative ways of playing the game rather than just, here's a self-confined expansion with all the stuff and none of the rules make sense if you try to bring it into anything else. And I really love their approach that it's accessible. You just got to finish the game system. I actually would absolutely love if you could play Jungles of Delthrak beginning out. Like, we don't have to play the game system to play some of these expansions. Perhaps they're not so difficult that we have to do that. Perhaps we can have a fresh party of heroes, and perhaps they can play test with that a little bit too and let us know in the quest book if that's something possible to do, if it's been balanced enough for that. I think with the new story mode and the new inclusion of difficulty modes to begin with, which it's kind of wrong to call them difficulty modes. It's more just like death modes or total party kill modes. We have this opportunity to take all of our heroes and apply those rules as written to a quest like Keller's Keep or Return of the Witch Lord and see how much easier it is when we have incapacitated heroes and we can revive them. Very Warhammer Quest feeling. Very Warhammer-y questy. I like that. And I think we can continue to see just a lot of expansion features and mechanics that make perfect sense in the expansion in which they are presented. And then, like, if you so choose to mix and match them at your own discretion, you can make them make even more sense or less sense, depending on how crazy you want to go with it. Anyway, guys, that's my podcast for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know what you thought. And I'm going to try to get this out on as many platforms as I can because I've got some stuff going on with RSS feeds and whatnot. And YouTube is the only place I know for sure right now, definitely, totally, where you can hear these. Spotify, maybe Pandora. I'll have to see what's going on with those and what I need to upload. But thanks for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day, whether you are gaming or working, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.